The men of Custer County, Nebraska, were gathered at Hoffman's General Store when Catherine Whitmore walked in carrying her dead husband's surveying tools. It was October 1873, and the prairie wind already had teeth. "Mrs. Whitmore," Johann Hoffman said, voice careful the way men speak to widows, "those are fine instruments. Your Thomas, God rest him, he knew his trade. I can give you $8 for the lot." Catherine set the brass transit on the counter, the compass, the measuring chains, everything Thomas had used to stake their homestead claim 6 months before the fever took him. "I'm not selling, Mr. Hoffman. I'm borrowing your shovel, the long-handled one." The store went quiet. 7 men stopped talking. They all knew what a widow did when her husband died on the frontier. She sold the claim, took the train east, went back to family. She didn't borrow shovels. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Robert Hayes spoke up, the man who held the neighboring claim. "You can't possibly think to prove up that land yourself. A woman alone, with 2 children." "I don't think it, Mr. Hayes. I'm doing it." "Doing what exactly?" This from Peter Gruber, the German farmer who'd tried to buy her quarter section twice already. Catherine looked at each man in turn. "Building a house, underground, into the south hillside of my property, the way Thomas planned before he died." The laughter started with Hayes, then Gruber, then all of them, filling Hoffman's store with the sound of men who knew better. "A hole in the ground?" Hayes managed between laughs. "You're going to live in a hole like a prairie dog?" "A dugout," Catherine corrected, voice level, 7 feet deep into the hillside, sod roof, timber supports. It's how the first homesteaders survived. "First homesteaders were men," Gruber said. "Men who could swing a pick 16 hours. You think a woman can move that much earth?" "I think a woman can do what needs doing when there's no other choice." She took the shovel, paid the nickel rental, walked out into October wind, while 7 men laughed behind her. But in 3 months, when the worst blizzard in Nebraska history buried the prairie under snow and cold that killed livestock standing, when temperatures hit 42 below zero and stayed there for 6 days, when conventional homes became death traps and families froze in their beds, Catherine Whitmore's underground house would shelter 19 people, and those same men would owe her their lives. This is the story of how a widow with 2 children and a dead husband's dream built the safest shelter on the Nebraska frontier, not because it looked right, but because it worked. Catherine Marie Whitmore was 31 years old when her husband Thomas died of typhoid fever in April 1873. They'd been married 12 years, had 2 children, Samuel aged 10 and Rebecca aged 7, had traveled from Ohio to Nebraska on the promise of free land under the Homestead Act of 1862. 160 acres, free if you could prove it up. Build a dwelling, break the soil, farm the land for 5 years, then it was yours, title clear, no payment. Thomas Whitmore had been a surveyor back in Ohio, good with measurements, angles, levels. He'd staked their claim in March 1873 on a quarter section 15 miles southwest of the settlement at Plum Creek. Rolling prairie, a creek with year-round water, a south-facing hillside that got winter sun. That hillside, Thomas had told Catherine the day they staked the claim, that's where we build, not on top, into it, a dugout, 7 feet deep into the earth, sod roof. The earth itself will be our insulation. Catherine had trusted him. Thomas knew things, understood how heat moved, how cold settled, how wind cut across open prairie. He'd read accounts from earlier homesteaders. Dugouts were how people survived the first winters when they had no money for lumber, no time before cold came. But Thomas never got to build it. The fever came fast in April, 10 days from first symptoms to burial. Catherine had watched him die in their canvas-topped wagon, the only shelter they had, watched him burn with fever while spring rain pounded the canvas, heard him whisper in delirium about the hillside, the measurements, the dream of a house that would keep them safe. She buried him on the claim, South Slope, under a cottonwood tree near the creek. Then she had a choice. Sell the claim, go back to Ohio, live with her sister's family as the poor relation, the widow with 2 children and no prospects. Or stay, prove up the land, build the house Thomas had planned. The problem was simple. She had $8, 2 children, a wagon, 1 horse, 1 cow, 6 chickens, and 160 acres of raw prairie with no shelter except canvas that leaked. Johann Hoffman had been kind but clear when she'd asked about lumber prices. A frame house, even small, you're looking at $200 minimum for materials, plus labor if you can't build it yourself. She had $8. What about a sod house? She'd asked. I've seen them. Walls of cut prairie sod stacked like bricks. Sod house, you still need timber for roof supports, door frame, window frames. You're looking at $40 minimum, and that's if you cut the sod yourself. Can you handle a breaking plow? She couldn't. Breaking prairie sod took a heavy plow pulled by oxen. She had 1 horse. That's when she'd remembered Thomas's plan. Not a sod house built up, a dugout built into the hillside. Let the earth itself be 3 of your 4 walls, only 1 wall to build, only 1 wall that needed timber. A dugout, Hoffman had said slowly. Haven't seen one of those in years. Early homesteaders used them, before they could afford better. Do they work? Work, Mrs. Whitmore, they're the warmest shelters on the prairie. Earth doesn't freeze deep, stays 50 degrees year-round below the frost line. A proper dugout, it'll stay warm in winter, cool in summer. But the digging... He'd trailed off, looking at her hands. I can dig. Not that much you can't. A proper dugout, you're talking about moving 20 tons of earth, maybe more. She'd left without the shovel that day. Went back to her canvas-topped wagon, fed her children the last of the cornmeal, looked at Thomas's surveying tools, and made a decision that everyone would laugh at. She would build it anyway. The first day, she moved 2 cubic feet of earth. It took her 8 hours of relentless work. Her hands blistered within the first 2 hours, the wooden handle of the shovel creating raw patches on her palms that wept clear fluid. By hour 4, those blisters had burst, and she was gripping the shovel with bleeding hands wrapped in strips torn from her petticoat. Her back screamed in protest, muscles she didn't know she had announcing their existence with sharp, hot pain that radiated from her spine to her shoulders. Samuel and Rebecca watched, scared and confused, while their mother attacked a hillside with a borrowed shovel. Their father was dead. Their home was a wagon, and now their mother was digging a hole like a wild animal preparing a den. "Mama," Rebecca had asked that night as Catherine soaked her ruined hands in creek water, gone pink with blood, "why are we digging?" "Building a house, baby, underground, where it's safe and warm." "Why underground? Why can't we have a house like other people?" Catherine looked at her daughter's face, still round with childhood, eyes that trusted her mother to make sense of a world that had stopped making sense when Papa died. Because the earth remembers summer when winter comes, and it remembers cool when summer burns. The earth is kind if you let it shelter you. The earth doesn't judge, doesn't mock, just protects. Rebecca didn't understand, but she helped carry small buckets of dirt anyway, her 7-year-old arms straining with the weight. The second day was worse. Catherine's hands had stiffened overnight, the damaged tissue contracting, making it agony to grip anything. She wrapped them thicker, using cloth from Thomas's shirts, the ones she'd kept that still smelled like him. Every swing of the pick sent fire through her palms. Every shovel load felt like her back might snap. She moved 3 cubic feet, 1 more than yesterday. Progress. Her blisters had opened deeper now, reaching raw flesh beneath, blood mixed with Nebraska clay. Turning the soil, she moved a rust color. Samuel cried watching her, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Winter was counting down, and she was racing against a calendar written in frost and death. By the end of the first week, she had carved a scar into the hillside 3 feet wide, 2 feet deep, 7 feet long. Nothing. Barely a start. It looked like a child's attempt at a cave. The prairies stretched endless around her, mocking her tiny scrape in the earth. At this rate, working alone, it would take 8 months to dig deep enough. 8 months to reach the 7 feet of depth that Thomas's calculations said she needed. She didn't have 8 months. Winter was maybe 10 weeks away, possibly less if the season came early, like it sometimes did on the plains. That Sunday, she didn't go to the church service at Plum Creek, couldn't face the questions, couldn't face the pity in the women's eyes and the condescension in the men's. Instead, she dug. 6 hours straight, pushing through exhaustion that made her vision swim. She moved 4 cubic feet, her best day yet. The measurements had to be exact because she was using Thomas's surveying tools, the ones she'd refused to sell. 7 feet deep into the hillside, 12 feet wide, 16 feet long. Those were the dimensions Thomas had calculated, drawn in his notebook, with neat annotations about load-bearing capacity, frost lines, and thermal retention. She dug in the mornings before the October sun raised the temperature. She dug in the evenings after feeding the children their meager dinner. She dug while Samuel watched Rebecca, their childhood suspended so their mother could tear earth apart with bleeding hands. She developed a rhythm, pick to loosen the compacted clay, shovel to move it, bucket to haul it out, repeat, repeat, repeat until muscles moved without thought, until pain became background noise, until she could work in a trance state where time disappeared. 3 weeks in, Robert Hayes rode by her claim on his way back from Plum Creek, sat on his horse watching her attack the hillside, studying her the way a man studies an animal behaving strangely. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called out, voice carrying that careful courtesy men use when addressing crazy women. "This is madness. You've moved what, maybe 40 cubic feet? 50 at most? You need to move 500, maybe 600 to get the dimensions you're attempting. At your current pace, you'll be digging until Christmas, and even if you finish the digging, you still have no timber for supports, no roof, no door, just a hole." Catherine leaned on her shovel, using it to stay upright. Sweat cut tracks through the dust, coating her face. Her hands, wrapped in bloody rags, trembled with fatigue. "Then I'll build faster, Mr. Hayes." "You can't build faster. You're one woman, a small woman. Moving earth isn't about will, Mrs. Whitmore. It's about muscle and mass and physics. You simply don't have the physical capacity. I have the capacity to do what needs doing when there's no other choice." Hayes shook his head slowly, almost pitying. "Sell me the claim. I'll give you fair price, better than fair. $80 for the quarter section. You can take your children east, back to Ohio. Live with family. Live like a civilized person instead of burrowing into the ground like some animal." "This land is mine, Mr. Hayes. My husband died claiming it. Died dreaming of the house we'd build here. I'm not selling his grave." "Your husband didn't die for this land. He died from typhoid, which has nothing to do with homesteading. You're making this about honor when it's really about stubbornness." Catherine straightened, finding strength she didn't know she had left. "Perhaps stubbornness is all I have, Mr. Hayes. Perhaps when you have nothing else, you hold on to stubborn. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." He'd ridden away, shaking his head, but he'd been right about one thing. She was too slow, far too slow. That night, Catherine did something she hadn't done since Thomas died. She prayed, not for help, for strength, for her hands to hold together, for her back to not break, for time. The next morning she found Samuel had dug while she slept. A small amount, maybe a quarter cubic foot, but he'd tried. 10 years old with his father's shovel attacking earth. "Mama," he'd said, "I can help. After watching Rebecca, I can dig." And Rebecca, 7 years old, said, "I can carry dirt." So they became a crew. Catherine swinging the pick to loosen hard clay, Samuel shoveling loose earth into buckets, Rebecca carrying small buckets out, dumping them downhill. Hour after hour, day after day, they moved faster, not much, but some. By mid-November, she'd dug 6 feet deep, 10 feet wide, 14 feet long. Close, so close, but not finished. And the sky was changing, high clouds moving fast, the wind shifting north, cold coming. She needed timber for the front wall, for the door frame, for the roof supports. Needed it cut, measured, assembled. Needed money she didn't have. That's when Peter Gruber rode up to her claim with an offer. "Mrs. Whitmore, I hear you need timber. I have timber, cedar posts from a fence I'm replacing. Good wood, 40 posts, 12 feet long each. I'll trade you for your cow." Catherine looked at her milk cow, the only source of milk for her children. Worth $20 easy. Gruber's fence posts, even cedar, worth maybe 8. "That's not a fair trade, Mr. Gruber." "Fair?" He smiled, not kindly. "Fair is me offering anything for your ridiculous project. Everyone knows you'll abandon this hole before winter. I'm being generous, giving you anything." She'd looked at the cow, at the hole in the hillside, at her children. "I'll take your timber, but I'm keeping the cow. You can have every chicken I own, all 6, and you'll help me place the roof supports. 1 day of labor." Gruber had laughed. "You think you can negotiate? You have no position, woman." "I have a position. I have something you want, and I know you're cheating me. But I'm still willing to trade because I need timber more than I need eggs. Take it or leave it." He'd taken it. 3 days later, he delivered 40 cedar posts and spent 1 full day helping her set supports across the top of her dugout. Cross beams every 3 feet, grumbling the entire time about waste and foolishness. But the supports went up. The frame was solid. "Now what?" Gruber had asked. "You have no boards for a roof, no shingles, no nothing." "I don't need boards. I have sod." He'd actually laughed in her face. "You're going to roof this hole with prairie grass, with prairie sod, 2-foot sections, overlapping. The grass roots hold it together. The earth insulates. It's how the first settlers did it. The first settlers were desperate. You don't have to be desperate. You can sell this claim right now and—" "Get off my land, Mr. Gruber." He'd left, but his words stayed. "You don't have to be desperate." Except she did. She was. Catherine cut sod for 3 days straight. Using Thomas's breaking plough, she cut strips of prairie sod 2 feet wide, 4 feet long, 6 inches thick. Each piece weighed 30 pounds. She cut 60 pieces. Then she lifted them one by one onto her dugout roof. Samuel helped. 10 years old, lifting sod that weighed half his weight. Rebecca helped, carrying tools, bringing water. They laid sod like bricks, overlapping, grass side down so the roots would knit together, 2 layers thick. The weight was immense, 4 tons of earth and grass pressing down on Gruber's cedar supports. But the supports held, and when the last piece was laid, when the roof was complete, Catherine stood back and looked at what she'd built. It didn't look like a house. It looked like a hill with a door. The front wall was rough cedar posts, chinked with clay. The door was canvas on a wooden frame. 1 small window, 6 inches by 12 inches, covered with oiled paper for light. The whole thing looked like a burrow, like an animal den. Inside was 1 room, 12 by 16 feet, 7 feet deep into the hillside. Dirt floor, dirt walls on 3 sides, timber wall on the 4th, sod roof. It was ugly, it was crude, it was embarrassing, and it was home. They moved in the 3rd week of November 1873, carried their few possessions into the earth, set up the small stove Catherine had bought with her last $3, hung blankets to divide the space into sleeping areas. That first night underground, Rebecca cried, "It smells like dirt," she sobbed. "I want a real house." Catherine held her daughter in the darkness, oil lamp throwing shadows on dirt walls. "This is a real house, baby. This is the house your papa planned. The house that's going to keep us alive." Everyone at church laughed at you, Samuel said quietly from his corner. They say we're living like animals. I know what they say. Why don't you care? Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Because caring what people think doesn't keep you warm when the temperature drops 40 below. Pride doesn't feed your children. This house might be ugly, but it's ours. And when the blizzards come, when the wind screams and the cold kills, we'll be safe in the earth while they freeze in their pretty houses. Samuel didn't respond, but he didn't cry either. The first real cold came 3 days later. Temperature dropped to 15 degrees overnight, wind howling across the prairie. Inside the dugout, the temperature was 52 degrees, comfortable without even lighting the stove. Catherine couldn't believe it. She'd expected cold, expected to burn through their small supply of firewood fast, but the earth held heat, the depth, the insulation, the massive weight of sod on the roof. It all worked exactly like Thomas had said it would. She lit the small stove just to cook breakfast. The temperature inside rose to 65 and stayed there all day. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, they were comfortable. Word got around. At the next church service, women asked questions. Is it true you don't need a fire? Anna Hoffman asked, voice careful. We light the stove for cooking, but for heat, the earth itself stays warm. But how? It's dirt. Dirt that's 7 feet deep, below the frost line. The earth doesn't freeze that deep. Stays about 50 degrees year-round. The sod roof adds more insulation. The whole thing works like a root cellar, but big enough to live in. It sounds... Anna paused, searching for polite words. Like a hole in the ground, Catherine offered. It is, but it's a warm hole. Some women nodded thoughtfully. The men still laughed. Warm now, Robert Hayes said. Wait until January. Wait until real cold comes. That dirt will freeze. You'll learn. But Catherine knew something they didn't. She'd measured the interior temperature every day, recorded it in Thomas's notebook, and the temperature didn't change. 52 degrees when it was 15 outside. 52 degrees when it was 30 outside. The earth was constant. December came. Temperature dropped to 8 degrees. Inside, 53 degrees. 0 degrees outside. 53 inside. 5 below. 54 inside. Catherine didn't gloat, just lived her life, kept her children warm, conserved her tiny supply of firewood because she barely needed it. And then, the week before Christmas, the radio operator at Plum Creek received a telegram from Omaha. A warning. Massive storm system forming over the Dakotas. Arctic air mass. Blizzard conditions expected across Nebraska. Historic cold predicted. The settlement prepared. Men reinforced roofs, brought livestock into barns, stocked firewood. The church organized shelter plans for families who might need it. Catherine checked her supplies. She had enough food for 2 weeks if she rationed, enough firewood for cooking, though she'd need almost none for heat. Her water source was the creek, but if that froze, she'd melt snow. She was ready. The storm hit on December 21st, 1873, the shortest day of the year, the day when darkness holds dominion and winter shows its true face. And this storm would last 6 days of horror that would be remembered in Nebraska history as the Great Blizzard of '73. The storm that killed livestock standing upright. The storm that froze families in their beds. The storm that taught the frontier that nature doesn't care about human ambition. It started with wind, not the constant prairie wind that Catherine had learned to live with, but something different, something massive and purposeful and alive. Wind that bent the cottonwoods along the creek until their trunks groaned. Wind that tore at anything not anchored, that found every loose board and shingle and tried to claim it. Then came snow. Not falling like normal snow, gentle and vertical, but flying horizontal like white bullets, driven by wind moving 40 miles per hour, white darkness that erased the world. Temperature dropped 20 degrees in 2 hours. Catherine checked Thomas's mercury thermometer, the one she'd mounted outside the dugout entrance. 20 degrees, then 10 degrees, the mercury falling like it was racing toward some terrible finish line, then 0, then 10 below, then 20 below. By evening of the first day, the thermometer read 30 below 0. Colder than anything Catherine had ever experienced in her 31 years. Colder than Ohio winters. Colder than anything natural. Inside the dugout, she checked her interior thermometer. 55 degrees, comfortable, almost warm. She lit the small stove to cook dinner, using her precious supply of wood carefully. Beans and cornbread, the frontier staples. The stove raised the interior temperature to 62 degrees. After dinner, she let the fire die because she didn't need it. The earth was doing its work, holding temperature, protecting them. Rebecca and Samuel wore one layer of clothes each, were comfortable enough to play a quiet game with Rebecca's rag doll, almost warm in their underground shelter, while above them, the world was trying to kill everything that lived. "Mama," Samuel said, looking up from the game, "shouldn't we be cold?" Everyone at church said winter underground would be terrible, said we'd freeze in our dirt hole. "We're 7 feet underground, baby. The earth doesn't freeze this deep. Never has, never will. The temperature down here stays constant, around 50 degrees year-round. The earth is protecting us from what's happening up there." She gestured toward the ceiling, toward the surface where wind screamed and temperatures plunged toward death. Outside, the blizzard screamed like something dying, or maybe something killing. It was hard to tell the difference. Day 2 brought temperatures that defied belief. 37 below 0 when Catherine checked at dawn. The mercury had contracted into a tiny silver ball at the bottom of the glass tube, barely visible. Wind still howling at 40 miles per hour, maybe faster. Visibility absolute 0. The world beyond her door had ceased to exist, replaced by white nothing. She'd been preparing breakfast, using the last of their cornmeal to make mush, when she heard a sound that didn't belong. Knocking. Desperate, a rhythmic pounding on her canvas door that could only mean one thing. Someone was out there. In 37 below, in wind that could strip flesh from bone. Catherine opened the door, and snow exploded inward, driven by wind that hit like a physical fist. Standing there, more ice than human, were Johann Hoffmann, his wife Anna, and their 3 children. All of them shaking so violently it looked like seizures. Lips blue-black, skin white as the snow. "Please," Johann gasped, and the word came out broken because his jaw was chattering too hard to form sounds properly. "Our house, the north wall, it failed. Wind came through. We can't keep warm. We're burning everything we own. Furniture, tools, my wife's hope chest, but it's not enough. Not nearly enough. We're freezing to death in our own house." "Get inside," Catherine commanded, pulling them bodily through the door. "All of you. Now." The Hoffmann family stumbled into the small dugout, bringing cold with them like a physical presence. Ice fell from their clothes in chunks. Their breath came in clouds. "It's warm," Anna Hoffmann whispered, disbelief so clear in her voice it was almost comical. "Oh, merciful God, it's actually warm in here." "Sit by the stove," Catherine directed, her voice taking on the no-nonsense tone of a woman managing crisis. "Get feeling back in your extremities. Check each other for frostbite. Fingers, toes, ears, nose. Anywhere that's white or grey needs immediate attention." They crowded around her small stove. 8 people now in a space designed for 3. But there was room. The 12 by 16 dimensions that had seemed so small suddenly felt adequate. Barely, but adequate. Anna Hoffmann kept touching the dirt walls like she couldn't believe they were real. "How? How is it this warm? We had a proper house, frame construction, real walls, a shingled roof, and we were dying. Our house was maybe 10 degrees inside. Maybe. We could see our breath. The water bucket froze solid, and here you are, underground, and it's... She couldn't finish, overcome. It's 56 degrees, Catherine said simply, showing her the thermometer. The earth maintains temperature. Your house stands above ground where every surface is exposed to the cold. Wind attacks it from all sides. But 75% of this shelter is buried in earth that doesn't change temperature. The cold can't reach us here. We mocked you, Johann said quietly, still shaking. At the store. I laughed when you said you were building underground. Thought you were desperate and foolish. You were half right. I was desperate, but desperation made me smart, not foolish. They stayed, obviously. What choice did they have? Their house had failed. The storm was still raging, temperature still 37 below, and falling. Day 3 brought more refugees and temperatures that seemed impossible. Peter Gruber appeared at her door around noon, dragging his wife and 2 sons through drifts that had climbed to 5 feet. His house hadn't structurally failed, but they'd run out of firewood and were dying anyway. 39 below, Gruber said when Catherine pulled them inside. 39. We burned every piece of furniture we owned, started on the floorboards, ripped them up and fed them to the fire. Still couldn't get above freezing inside our house. My wife, her fingers, I think she has frostbite. Catherine examined Frau Gruber's hands. The fingers were white and waxy, no feeling. Bad, but not death yet. Warm water, Catherine instructed. Not hot, lukewarm. We'll warm them slowly. Too fast and the tissue dies. 11 people now. Her tiny dugout was becoming crowded, but everyone was warm. That was what mattered. This isn't possible, Gruber kept repeating like a man whose understanding of reality had shattered. How is it warm in here? We have a proper house. Walls 2 inches thick. A real roof with shingles. And we were dying in a proper house. And you, living in a hole like an animal, you're comfortable. It makes no sense. It makes perfect sense if you understand heat, Catherine explained patiently, too tired to be angry at his insults. Your house fights the cold, tries to resist it with walls and roofs. But walls conduct cold. Roofs lose heat to the sky. Your house stands exposed where the wind can attack every surface. This house surrenders to the earth, lets the earth protect it. 3 of these 4 walls are earth itself. Earth that's 7 feet deep where temperature never changes. The earth is kind, Mr. Gruber, if you're humble enough to let it shelter you. He didn't respond, just held his shaking wife, whose fingers were slowly, painfully coming back to life in lukewarm water. Day 4, 40 below zero. Robert Hayes arrived with his family. His barn had collapsed under the weight of snow. 3 cows dead. His house still standing but losing heat faster than his fireplace could generate it. I don't want your pity, he said at Catherine's door, pride warring with desperation. I'm not offering pity. I'm offering shelter. Get inside. 15 people. The dugout was crowded now, packed. But everyone was warm. They organized. The women cooked in shifts on Catherine's small stove. The men slept in rotation, so everyone could stretch out at some point. The children huddled together, making games out of the cramped space, and the temperature inside never dropped below 55 degrees. Even with 15 people, even with opening the door multiple times, even with 42 below zero outside. I mocked you, Hayes said quietly to Catherine on day 5. At Hoffman's store. I laughed. I said you were living like a prairie dog. I remember. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Catherine looked at him, at his wife, at his children, warm and alive. Being wrong isn't a sin, Mr. Hayes. Staying wrong after you learn better is. The storm broke on day 6. The wind stopped. The sun came out. Temperature rose to 20 below, which felt like a heat wave. They emerged from the dugout to a transformed world. Snow drifts 20 feet high, trees snapped like kindling, and damage, so much damage. Hayes's barn collapsed, total loss. Gruber's house, standing but with 6-foot ice build-up inside the walls where their breath had frozen. The Hoffman house, north wall completely failed, would need total reconstruction. Catherine's dugout, unchanged, perfect. The sod roof had accumulated 3 feet of snow, but the weight meant nothing to earth that already held tons. The front wall was solid. The interior was exactly as they'd left it. Warm. 19 people had sheltered in that dugout over 6 days. 19 people who would have frozen in their conventional houses, and every single one was alive and unharmed. The settlement at Plum Creek hadn't been so lucky. 2 families dead, 5 more with severe frostbite, livestock losses catastrophic. But everyone who'd made it to Catherine's underground house survived. The following Sunday, the church service was packed. Everyone who could travel came. They wanted to hear the story, wanted to understand how a widow's hole in the ground had worked better than every conventional house in the county. Pastor Wilson asked Catherine to speak. She stood in front of people who'd laughed at her, people who'd called her foolish, people who'd predicted her death. "My husband Thomas planned this house before he died," Catherine said quietly. "He understood something about the frontier. He understood that sometimes the old ways work better than the new ways. The first homesteaders built dugouts because they had no money for lumber, but they were also warmer, safer, more practical than frame houses. We forgot that in our rush to build proper homes. We forgot that the earth is kind if you let it shelter you." She paused, looking at the faces watching her. "I didn't build underground because I wanted to. I built underground because I had no choice. But in having no choice, I learned something. Pride kills on the frontier. Pride says, build a house that looks right, even if it doesn't work right. Humility says, build what works and stop caring what it looks like. My house looks like a hill with a door. My children live in a room with dirt walls. People laughed, but my children are alive. And so are 18 other people who wouldn't be if I'd cared more about looking respectable than being smart." The church was silent. Then Robert Hayes stood. "I laughed at you, Mrs. Whitmore. I need to apologize publicly. You saved my family's life. I was wrong. You were right." Peter Gruber stood next. "I cheated you on the timber trade. I thought you were desperate and foolish. I was the fool. I'll bring you back your chickens." One by one the men stood, apologized, thanked her, and one by one they asked how to build a dugout of their own. By spring of 1874, 7 families in Custer County were building dugout homes. Catherine helped design each one, using Thomas's notes, his measurements, his understanding of earth and heat and survival. She became known as the Dugout Woman. People came from other counties to see her house, to learn, to understand how a widow with no money had built the safest shelter on the Nebraska frontier. She proved up her claim in 1878, received the title, 160 acres free and clear, built a proper frame house in 1880 when she could afford it, using money from selling design plans for dugouts, but she never tore down the original, kept it as a root cellar. And every winter, when the blizzards came, when the temperatures dropped and the wind screamed, she'd look at that hill with a door and remember. Remember the laughter. Remember the mockery. Remember the desperate digging. Remember the moment when everyone who'd laughed was begging for shelter, and she'd remember Thomas's words, whispered in fever. "Let the earth protect you. Let it hold you. Don't fight the frontier. Learn from it." The earth had protected her, had held her, had proven her right when everyone else was wrong, and in the end that was all that mattered.